I'm Gary, and this is Coasting with Culture, which is all about combining theme park visits and riding roller coasters with various cultural experiences around the world. With a change in my schedule, I found some time to knock out a few coasters off my to-ride list, including one that was due to close by season's end. This also led to a stay at a historic hotel with a bit of a European feel. When Philip made his transition from Southwest Airlines to Delta and allowed me to make the change with him on his flight benefits, this opened up a lot of direct options for me out of Seattle, with one of those direct options being particularly helpful in getting to a part of the country where I had a nice collection of coasters on my to-ride list. The idea of heading into the Northeast by way of Boston would be expedited a bit when Santa's Village announced they were closing one of their coasters by the end of the season. And while it was a model of coaster from Zaire that I'd ridden several of in different parts of the world, I don't like to leave coasters unridden if I can help it. This led to about a month or so of watching Boston red-eye flight loads, so I could try to hit several parks in the area. Most of the time I'd either find that the availability wasn't great, or a chance to pick up some extra tour work would supersede my desire to get that soon-to-close credit. Going into August, the window for a Rudy's Rapid Transit ride would become even smaller as it was a very busy month, since I'd be helping my friends Jay and Chelsea with rides to and from Vancouver for their Disney Alaska cruise, heading back to Orlando for the wedding of my friends Randy and RD, and my mom would be coming to town for my older sister's 40th birthday. Because of all that, and September looking pretty busy from the next Buzz Bar Stumble, as well as classes in the fall starting up, it seemed less and less likely that I'd snag that coaster before it closed. But a chance to shift my schedule around a bit, which added some hours on a different day, opened up an additional day off before one that was already scheduled. And it just so happened that the flight loads were more favorable than the previous times they had been looked at. The plan would be to catch the red-eye to Boston, head directly up to Santa's Village after landing, head to Storyland until about closing time, and finish the evening at Old Orchard Beach, Maine for Palace Playland. The following day I was going to explore a bit of Portland before getting one last coaster at York's Wild Kingdom, and then returning to Boston for the flight home. With that plan in place, all I had to do after what turned out to be a wonderful day for a Mount Rainier tour was to get my stuff and head to the airport. While the number of open seats stayed pretty stable leading up to my airport arrival, sitting at the gate became a different story thanks to the number of available seats continuing to dwindle as if new passengers were coming out of thin air to take them. And after a few moments of not being so sure if this was going to happen, got my boarding pass, going to Boston. I became even more curious about how this flight would be, as it was on board one of Delta's new Airbus A321neos that had been in service for less than a year. It certainly showed from the newer seats used in first class and the interior design. I was also thrilled that there was at least one window seat available in the exit row, since I really didn't want to be stuck in the middle. The lack of an attached armrest on one side of the seat made it feel more spacious than most economy seats. While I didn't really get the sleep I was hoping for on this flight, I at least felt a lot more comfortable than I usually do in an economy. I don't know what it is about Boston Logan Airport, but almost every time I fly here, something goes wrong trying to navigate it. So I threw myself off because I thought that I would follow the signs that said to Sixt rent a car, and as it turns out, all the rental desks are in the same area. The sign was just where to go to find the actual car once you've gone to the desk. We got the car though. Time to start driving up north to New Hampshire. I lucked out with the timing of my pickup because I was about to get a more basic car, but they needed to give it to a younger driver under 25 years old. So I was given a pretty nice upgrade with a BMW 228i. Unfortunately, it took a while for me to be able to enjoy driving it, because the traffic out of the airport was downright atrocious, thanks to construction on the Sumner Tunnel, leading to everyone being funneled into the Ted Williams Tunnel for I-90. This delayed start made me wonder if I should alter my plans at all, but ultimately had no choice when I saw that Joey shared in the BuzzBars Discord that Santa's Village was still requiring reservations and online tickets.
So a slight adjustment to be made because unfortunately Santa's Village is sold out today. So we're instead gonna head to Maine.
So the new plan was to kick off this quick coaster run with a stop in York's Wild Kingdom, since I was only going for the one coaster, and I'd get there right around the time that the rides would open for the day. Wild Kingdom is a smaller local zoo that has an attached amusement park. Admission to the zoo does not include the rides, as they have a pay-per-ride model, but it's nice for those who just need a quick coaster pickup, since admission to the zoo is not required, and their coaster is a mouse-themed Wacky Worm. It was pretty amusing to see how many people ended up watching as I rode, because I was the only one on it, and apparently the folks in Maine aren't used to seeing a shameless coaster rider like myself. Definitely the most attention I've gotten, while obtaining a shameless credit. With that ride off the list, it was time to head to the next stop, which was about a 2-hour drive in largely rural areas. Although there's a rest area and information center at Interval Vista just before arriving, that gives what I imagine on a clear day would be a gorgeous view of the surrounding mountains. A short drive further, and it was time to visit Storyland, which was another example of how smaller parks can be an absolute joy to visit, even if they don't match the huge thrills of their larger counterparts. Since time was of the essence, I dove right into the coasters, starting with Polar Coaster, a custom family coaster from Hopkins that feels like it was inspired by a wild mouse, but utilizes the terrain more, and has one characteristic that it shares with some old school B&M coasters. And the station has some really cute theming. The ride I was most looking forward to in the park was their Gravity Group wooden coaster, Roar-O-Saurus, one of several smaller coasters to come from the American company that have been added to multiple parks of similar size, meant to welcome riders of a larger age range.
Oh man, Roar-O-Saurus is just silly fun. It reminds me a lot of riding Wooden Warrior for the first time. Not as extreme on the airtime, but it still has its pops. Definitely a good level up coaster for the younger riders who are starting to get into the bigger rides, and this is one that can kind of simulate getting onto the bigger wooden coasters, so definitely a great addition for this park.
This was certainly a ride that could be very re-rideable with lighter crowds, although there were a few more rides I wanted to try out, and the weather certainly made it easier to do so.
It's raining, so it's wet. Might as well try the water rides.
It was recommended to me that I try out their Hopkins log flume bamboo chutes.
That was an adorable log flume. Didn't get too wet. Probably would have been a little bit drier if it wasn't for the rain, but time to see if the other water ride will do the damage.
And that other water ride was Dr. Geyser's Remarkable Raft Ride, which doesn't really hide the fact that there's a pretty good chance you're getting wet.
Let's see if Dr. Geyser makes good on that promise.
With a turn-of-the-century theme, several of the items surrounding the ride offer some hidden tricks with smaller sprays of water. But what really gets you are the geysers that erupt as you pass by on the raft. Needless to say, this isn't just a pleasant drift downstream with a light spritz here and there.
They did not lie. You get wet. At least it's raining, so it doesn't matter.
With the last bit of time before closing, I went for a couple more laps on Roar-O-Saurus, and while they might not be adding a coaster every few years here, I wouldn't be opposed to making another visit upon a return to the area to see more of what the park has to offer beyond those 4 rides I tried.
You know, it might have been a little wet from the rain, but it was still worth making the stop here to come and check it out. But now it's time to head back over to Maine to try and get a couple of coasters at a park that I'd previously been to in the past.
And a bit after an hour and a half, I was back in Maine again for an evening at Old Orchard Beach's Palace Playland. This was the one park of the trip that I had previously visited when I joined Theme Park Review's 2011 Northeast Tour. One of the coasters at the park currently is the Orient Express and was here during that visit, so a reride wouldn't be necessary. They did, however, remove their Galaxy and replaced it with a larger coaster while also adding a third, meaning I was looking to ride their SBF Visa Spinner in Wipeout and a fairly large Preston and Barbieri coaster called Sea Viper. Upon arrival though, one of the maintenance guys was working on the control panel of Wipeout, so I just made my way over to ride Sea Viper, and I have to say, while these coasters aren't usually the most thrilling rides out there, the size and layout of this one seems to give it a bit more oomph, as it offered some noticeable positive G's. Nothing like you would experience on a Batman inverted clone from Six Flags, but still more than when your car goes through a minor dip in the road, and its size really helps it to stand out in that part of town. Upon exiting Sea Viper, the chances of riding Wipeout seem to be going in the other direction.
Well, it's not looking great. The fact that they just turned the power off, but it could be that there's something they're going to work on. So I've already got the tickets for it. I'm going to wait and see if they get it open. And in the meantime, I think I'm going to see if I can find somewhere to get some food.
After grabbing a couple of fairly average slices of pizza, I came back to see an abandoned coaster with no maintenance worker. Although he did return and started trying to get it going, and the side barriers opened.
Maybe?
And closed again. And then the ride was alone once more.
Well, unfortunately, the mechanic walked away from the ride and hasn't been back since, so I think it's safe to say I'm gonna go ahead and call it a night on that one.
Figuring that was probably the end of the ride for the night, I decided to make use of the tickets I had with a bit of a fun house in the Grand Orient Palace. I walked by a ticket booth and saw confirmation that Wipeout was done for the day.
Which is a bit of a shame, because it would have been nice to complete the state of Maine. However, that's what happens in this hobby. Sometimes you get them and sometimes you don't. But I have a feeling I'll be back in this area at some point.
Since I was originally going to York the following day before heading back to Boston, I booked a hotel in nearby Portland, staying at the Inn at St. John, which is one of the city's more historic buildings, as it was opened in 1897 by railroad tycoon John Deering for rail customers of the former rail station that used to operate across the street. The hotel maintains its classic feel, not just from the decorations, but also the need to use stairs to get to your room, and it also has a bit more of a European feel, because several of the rooms use shared bathrooms, and they did a great job of keeping the shared restroom clean, although the shower is fairly short and narrow, as my head was only a few inches from the top, and I'm not even 6 feet tall. But the room was comfortable, and felt like staying at a friend's guest room, which made for a good night's sleep. After driving a couple hours in the morning, I was able to make it to the park that inspired this trip, Santa's Village, located in northern New Hampshire. It was quite apparent from the beginning that this is a really nicely kept park, especially when compared to some of the larger regional parks in the country. There were several things I enjoyed about this place, from their decorative penguins around the park, including some that served as a guide for getting around, and some of their holiday humor.
I have to admit, I appreciate this bit of toilet humor.
Of course, this stop also brought the main reason for trying to get up here before the end of the season, and that was for a ride on Rudy's Rapid Transit. Not because it shares the same name as my dad, but because I wanted to gain the credit before it was retired. Like many other Zier large Tivoli coasters out there, they send you around twice on a course with large swooping turns and a few low-to-the-ground moments on board an incredibly long train. While it's always a bummer to see a coaster closing, the park already announced that they were replacing it with Midnight Flyer, a Vekoma design ride that will offer a higher and faster layout while still appealing to the family audience the park caters to. Another great example of the small touches from Santa's Village comes with the Reindeer Carousel, where all of the riding figures are reindeer and the benches are sleighs. But the gem of the ride is the decorative images up top that portray the gifts of the 12 days of Christmas. and some of them are pretty clever, such as the calling birds using telephones, or the French hens wearing attire attributed to the European nation. I honestly am not sure if I could have timed this ride much better, because a rather large band of heavy rain passed over, so I was glad to have the carousel's roof overhead. However, the local mayor looked pretty concerned about potential flooding. It was also amusing to see how people were trying to keep dry while still on outdoor rides. When the rain lightened up a bit, I switched shelters by heading over for a ride on the Great Humbug Adventure. Their absolutely adorable shooting dark ride, lightly based on the Charles Dickens classic A Christmas Carol, where you try to help Ebenezer Scrooge with ridding his home of humbugs. While you spend the ride going after them, all's well in the end as Scrooge befriends them and they all spread some holiday cheer. The park offers another coaster with Poogie Penguin's Spin-Out Coaster, one of the larger 3-loop versions of the SBF Visa Spinner. Not nearly as common as the regular figure 8 version, but just as shameless a credit. I also made sure to try out the Yule Log Flume, which provides a nice and relaxing ride through the woods, leading up to one big drop and splash, which can be seen from an observation space right alongside of it after a short trail walk from near the station.
The splash on that was a little one-sided for me because I got a really hardcore on the left and the ride's pretty dry. Still a fun ride though.
And as I was about to see what else the park had to offer, something that might have been related to the weather came to my attention.
So originally my plan was that I was going to stick around the park another hour or so and head out maybe about noon, 12:30, continue on to my next stop. The only problem though is that when I took a look at the app from Delta, I noticed that there were a lot more open seats than there had been when I had first listed for it. And then I noticed that the flight has been delayed with a 9 p.m. departure. For the most part, that's not a big deal. The only concern I have is that that might mean the flight gets canceled if it gets delayed much further. So for that reason, I'm going to go ahead and cut my visit here short, get back to Boston as quickly as I can to see if I can figure out a way to get back to Seattle, maybe with a connection.
The good news was during my drive back, I found out there were multiple weather-related delays, including the plane I was going to be taking to get back to Seattle, as it was running behind flying over to Boston. That bit of information and the improving weather would become quite helpful, especially because of that Sumner Tunnel closure.
Well, thanks to Boston Logan's traffic, I've lost all the time that I saved getting here early. Now it's starting to look like it's a good thing that my flight's delayed, because the rate that this is going, just trying to get the rental car desk might end up making me late for the original time I was supposed to be here.
On the bright side though, I was able to return the car before the deadline.
That was some stupidly horrendous traffic. I know that there's a tunnel that they're working on replacing or repairing or whatever they're doing right now, but yeah. It gonna be a while. Might be about time to find somewhere to sit for a bit and hunker down.
Since the flight was still a few hours away, I decided to pay a visit to the terminal's Harpoon Brewery restaurant, especially since I hadn't really had the time to stop and enjoy a beer on this trip. I chose one of the company's other brands with a UFO White, which was a delightful wheat beer. Combine that with their grilled cheese panini and tomato basil soup, I was a happy camper. Especially because the flight load for this flight seemed to be far less dramatic than some of the previous flights that I've done with Delta on standby so far. We just had to wait for the plane to get in from Seattle. I was quite thankful for the plane being far lighter of load of passengers, so it made the flight for all of us much more comfortable. With an early morning at work the following day, I spent most of the flight watching the back of my eyelids until the passenger seat behind me startled me awake with a really loud "whoa!" Although I might have been shocked to see the same sight as we were around Spokane, and you could see the wildfires burning in the night below. And upon exiting the plane, another successful coaster trip was complete. While the coaster that influenced this trip might not have been a signature scream machine to draw the masses from thousands of miles away, I really enjoyed getting a chance to experience a few new parks and their fun ride offerings, while also getting back to a park I hadn't been to in a good while. I also love that this allowed me to have a first-time experience with a classic-style hotel that had been in business for over 100 years. I don't know exactly when I'll be back in this part of the country, but you can bet that I'd gladly come back to the Northeast to go coasting with culture again. Thank you for watching this video from Coasting with Culture. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up and click on the subscribe button to see future videos here on YouTube, like these ones which you may enjoy as well. Additional content can be found at coastingwithculture.com, and you can also follow Coasting with Culture on various social media channels at CoastWCulture for announcements, previews, and updates. Thanks again for watching, and until next time, take care and safe travels.